I was driving back from the superstore on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray November morning that makes you feel like the whole world has gone quiet. I had 2 bags of groceries in the back seat and a thermos of tea going cold in the cuff holder. My phone rang just as I was pulling onto the highway. It was my son, Mom. His voice was wrong. Not the voice he uses when he's calling to chat. Not even the voice he uses when something small has gone sideways. This was different. Lower. Like he was trying to hold something back. Mom, something happened to Renee. She's at St. Michael's. You need to come now. I didn't ask questions. I just drove. Renee is my daughter-in-law. She married my son Marcus 4 years ago, on a Saturday in late August at the conservation area outside of Guelph where they had their first date. She wore her grandmother's earrings and cried through the vows. I sat in the front row and I cried too. She came from a Jamaican family. Her mother, Yvonne, had immigrated to Brampton in the late 80s, raised 3 daughters on a nursing salary, and built a life that Renee was enormously proud of. I loved that about her. I loved that she knew where she came from. My son's family, my family is white. 3rd-generation Canadian. Marcus's father passed when Marcus was 16, and after that it was just the 2 of us for a long time. I raised him to be a good man. I thought I had. His sister-in-law, his brother Derek's wife, a woman named Sylvie, had made it clear from the beginning that she had opinions about Renee. Nothing she ever said out loud. Sylvie was too careful for that. But there were the comments at Christmas dinners, the way she'd look just slightly past Renee when they were in the same room, the remarks about how things are done in this family that seemed specifically designed to make Renee feel like an outsider. I noticed, Renee noticed. We talked about it once, quietly, over tea at my kitchen table, and she smiled that careful smile she'd learned to use around certain people and said, "I know how to handle it, Gloria. Don't worry." I should have worried more. When I got to St. Michael's, Marcus was in the waiting area outside the emergency department. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, even though it had only been 2 hours since he'd called me. There was something on his jacket, a dark stain near the collar, and it took me a long moment to understand what I was looking at. Marcus. I put both hands on his face. Tell me. He told me. Renee had gone for a walk that morning. She did that sometimes early, before Marcus left for work, a habit she'd had since before they were married. 30 minutes along the trail behind their subdivision, earbuds in, coffee in hand. She hadn't come back. Marcus had assumed she'd stopped to talk to a neighbor, then assumed she was running late, then gone looking when an hour had passed. He found her at the far end of the trail, near the ravine. She was on the ground. She had been beaten. She was 6 months pregnant. I sat down in one of the plastic waiting room chairs and I held my son's hand, and I did not let myself fall apart because someone needed to stay upright and I had been doing that job for 30 years. A doctor came out 40 minutes later. Renee was stable. The baby was stable. There were 2 cracked ribs, a deep laceration along her left cheekbone, severe bruising. She had been conscious when the paramedics arrived. She had given them 1 sentence before she lost consciousness again. She had said, "She told me I had this coming." They let me see her that afternoon. She was awake, propped up on pillows, an IV in her arm, her mother sitting in the chair beside the bed, holding her hand with both of hers. Yvonne looked up when I came in and something passed between us. 2 mothers, looking at the same thing, understanding each other perfectly. Renee's face was swollen on the left side. Her eye was half closed. She looked at me and she said, very quietly, "Gloria." I sat down on the edge of the bed and I took her other hand. "I know you need to rest," I said. "You don't have to talk." "I want to tell you," she said. "I need someone to know." She had been on the trail for about 15 minutes when she heard someone come up behind her. She turned around and it was Sylvie. She said Sylvie looked calm. Not angry, not agitated, just calm. The way you look when you've thought about something for a very long time and finally decided to do it. Renee had taken her earbuds out and started to say something, some greeting, some ordinary words. And then Sylvie had said, quietly and clearly, "You never belonged in this family. Your blood doesn't belong here." And then it wasn't calm anymore. Renée didn't remember all of it clearly. She remembered hitting the ground. She remembered covering her stomach with both arms. She remembered Sylvie walking away. She looked at me after she said all of this and she said, "She knew I was pregnant, Gloria. She knew." I held her hand and I did not say anything for a moment because what I was feeling was something I had no name for. It wasn't just anger. It was something much colder and much more deliberate than anger. "I know," I said. "I believe you, and I need you to let me handle this." I drove to my brother Raymond's house that evening. Raymond is 72, retired OPP, Ontario Provincial Police, 30 years on the force, the last 8 as a detective in Barrie. He has the kind of stillness that comes from spending decades listening to people tell him terrible things without letting it move him off his footing. He opened the door before I knocked because he'd been watching from the window when I pulled in. I told him everything. He sat at his kitchen table with his hands folded and he listened without interrupting until I was finished. Then he said, "Has she given a formal statement yet?" "Tomorrow morning. Marcus is taking her." "Good. The trail will have surveillance. The subdivision at the east entrance has cameras." He paused. "You said Sylvie was calm when she approached her." "That's what Renée said. That's premeditated, Gloria." He got up and poured us both coffee and we sat there for a long time without talking. Outside his window, the birch trees were bare against the gray sky. I watched them and thought about Renée covering her stomach with both arms, the only thing she could do. "There's something else," Raymond said eventually. I looked at him. "Derek knew." I didn't move. "How do you know that?" "I don't know it for certain. Not yet, but I know Sylvie. She's been in this family for 11 years and she has never done anything spontaneous in her life. Someone encouraged this, someone who had things to gain." He looked at me steadily. "You know what Derek and Sylvie have been pushing for since your mother's estate was settled?" I did know. My mother had passed 2 years earlier. She had left the family property, a 40-acre lot outside of Barrie, with a house on it that had been in our family for 3 generations, split equally between me, Derek, and Raymond. The property was worth considerably more than it had been when my mother bought it. Derek had been pressing, since the will was read, to sell. Raymond and I had refused. Derek had a different argument every few months. The upkeep was too much. The market was right. We were being sentimental. What he didn't say, but what Raymond and I had understood for a long time, was that he and Sylvie had money problems. Serious ones. Marcus and Renée were the legal heirs to my share. If something happened to Renée, were the legal heirs to my share. If something happened to Renée, if the marriage ended, if Renée were driven away, Derek's position changed. Marcus's position changed. Everything became more complicated in ways that benefited one side. I sat with that thought until it became something solid. The police took Sylvie in for questioning 2 days after Renée gave her statement. The trail camera at the east entrance had caught her at 7:30 and 14 in the morning, walking toward the ravine. A neighbor's ring camera, 4 houses down from the trail entrance, had caught her car parked on the street at 7:39. Renée's emergency call had come in at 7:31. Raymond had flagged as contacts quietly. He wasn't on the case. He'd been retired for 4 years, but he knew people, and people talked to him. Sylvie was charged with aggravated assault causing bodily harm. With the pregnancy, the Crown was considering additional charges. Her lawyer released a statement saying she denied everything. The camera footage apparently was something her lawyer was struggling to address. Derek called me the morning after the charges were announced. He said, "You need to stop this. This is family." I said, "Renée is family." He said, "You know what I mean." I said, "I know exactly what you mean, Derek. That's the problem." I hung up. Here's what I learned in the weeks that followed from Raymond's careful, patient, methodical work through phone records and financial documents that were obtained through proper legal channels. 6 weeks before the assault, Sylvia transferred $14,000 from their joint account to an account I didn't recognize. Raymond traced it. It was a line of credit in Sylvie's name alone, opened 8 months earlier. The transfer happened 3 days after Derek and Sylvie had met with a financial advisor about their mortgage, which was in arrears. 2 weeks before the assault, there were 11 text messages between Derek's phone and Sylvie's phone between the hours of 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. The content of those messages was part of what the Crown was now looking at. 3 days before the assault, Derek had called a real estate agent in Barrie and asked about listing prices for rural properties in Simcoe County. He had not mentioned this to me or to Raymond. I sat in Raymond's kitchen again when he showed me all of this, and I thought about my brother Derek, the boy I had grown up with, who I had driven to hockey practice for 3 years because our mother couldn't drive in the winter, who had stood beside me at our father's funeral, and I felt something close and break that I did not know how to describe. "I want to protect Marcus and Renee," I said. "That's all I want." Raymond put his hand on mine. "I know. That's what we're going to do." Renee came home from the hospital on a Thursday. Her mother and I had set up the spare room at my house, closer to the hospital for follow-ups, quieter than their subdivision, a place where she could rest without worrying about who might come to the door. She walked in carefully, still sore, and stood in the hallway and looked around and said, "This is a lot, Gloria. You didn't have to do all this." "Sit down," I said. I made soup. She laughed a little, carefully, because laughing still hurt. Yvonne came every afternoon. The two of them would sit in the living room, Renee with her feet up, Yvonne with her knitting, talking in the easy, quiet way of a mother and daughter who have known each other long enough not to need noise. I would make tea and sit with them sometimes, and sometimes I'd leave them to it and go to the kitchen and pretend to be very busy doing things that didn't matter. One afternoon, I heard Yvonne say, quietly, she was proud of you, you know. She told me, before any of this, she said Renee is the best thing to happen to this family in a long time. I stood very still in the kitchen. I know, Renee said. That woman, Yvonne said, and then went quiet. No more words needed. Sylvie's case went before the court in March. The trail camera footage, the Ring doorbell footage, the text messages, the timeline, all of it was entered. Renee gave her victim impact statement from the stand, and she did not cry until the very end, when she talked about covering her stomach with her arms on the cold ground and not knowing if her daughter was still alive inside her. The gallery was silent. Sylvie was convicted of aggravated assault causing bodily harm. The Crown had also pursued charges related to the pregnancy, and those were upheld. She was sentenced to 3 years with a further period of supervised release. Derek was charged separately after the phone records were fully analyzed with counseling to commit an offense. His case was ongoing. His lawyer was managing the process. I did not follow it closely. Raymond kept track for both of us. I heard through people I no longer chose to think of as family that Derek was in the process of selling their house in Orangeville. I heard they were struggling. I held no satisfaction in that. I held nothing toward him anymore, which was its own kind of sadness. The absence of feeling for someone you used to love. On a Thursday in February, at 4:47 in the morning, Renee woke Marcus up and said it was time. I got the call at 5:15. I was already awake. I am always awake at that hour now. Some part of me still listening. I got dressed in the dark and drove to Sunnybrook through streets that were empty and lit orange and covered in a thin new snow. I sat with Yvonne in the waiting room for 4 hours. We drank bad hospital coffee and talked about nothing important. Her garden, my sister's new apartment in Victoria, a documentary we'd both seen about the St. Lawrence Seaway. We were 2 women waiting for the same thing, understanding each other completely. At 9222, Marcus came through the double doors. His face was something I had no word for. Open, maybe. Undone in the best possible way. She's here, he said. They named her Constance, after Renee's grandmother, the woman whose earrings Renee had worn at the wedding. Constance Yvonne. She was 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with her father's nose and her mother's eyes and a look of complete seriousness that made everyone who saw her laugh. I held her in the hospital room while Renee slept, and Marcus sat with his head tipped back against the wall, exhausted and stunned, and smiling at the ceiling. Yvonne had gone to get coffee. The room was quiet except for the sound of the monitors and the small sounds Constance made, the sounds of someone new to the world, exploring the edges of it. I looked at her face and I thought about everything that had been done to prevent this moment, the deliberateness of it, the coldness. A woman who had stood on a trail on a gray morning and decided that this child did not deserve to exist in her world. And I thought about Renée's arms, wrapped around her on the cold ground. Love is not passive. That was what I had learned. Love, when it is real, does not wait to be treated fairly before it acts. It goes to the hospital. It makes soup. It sits with a woman in a waiting room at 5 a.m. It calls its brother and says, "Tell me everything you know." It stands up in a courtroom and tells the truth. I held Constance against my chest, and she made a small sound and turned her face toward warmth the way new things do. Instinctively, trustingly, certain that warmth will be there. It was there. It is always there in this family, in the one we made and kept and held onto. "Hello," I whispered to her. "You have no idea how long we've been waiting for you." Outside the hospital window, the snow was still falling, soft and even, covering everything that needed to be covered, leaving the rest clean.